We believe that parents have that fundamental right to direct their children's education, and state law protects their right to teach their children at home. I think the main conflict that is there is that when school officials get involved in the homeschooling program, many times they're trying to make them appear or look like what the public school is teaching. A lot of times I get letters from the school officials who say, well, you just need to show us your curriculum, or you need to show us what you're doing, what you're teaching your child. And I think the beauty of the homeschooling movement is that you're able to develop that educational program that's best for your child, for your family. And it often doesn't look exactly like the public school. And so many of the times these school officials have the impression that if you're not doing what they're doing, then you're not educating your child.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hi, I'm Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and this is another episode of Homeschool Talks. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome HSLDA longtime staff attorney, TJ Schmidt. Welcome, TJ.
Well, thanks, Jim.
Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a bit of a ruckus that you've been experiencing in Kentucky with some school officials there. But before we get to that, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. Tell us, how long have you worked at HSLDA and what are your duties here?
Well, I'm one of the staff attorneys, senior counsel actually, here at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. It's been my privilege to work at HSLDA over 20 years. I first came to HSLDA as fresh out of law school as a legal assistant and became an attorney and have had the privilege of serving many of our members all across the country.
So, TJ, are you married?
Yes.
Were you married when you came here?
I was not. I was single, just out of law school, but I married my wife, Susan, and we've been married coming up on 20 years. We currently have 7 children, but twins are on the way, so jumping over 8, going to 9.
Well, that's you have now outpaced me. I'm regret to say we don't have any more coming, and we finished at 7. I thought 7 was kind of the magic number because you and Mike Donnelly and Chris.
Yeah. Well, 7 is the perfect number in the Bible, but God had other plans.
Susan homeschools your kids?
Yeah, Susan does the vast majority of the homeschooling. As our children have gotten older into the high school age, I've taken on a little bit more of a responsibility. So I do some, currently teaching a co-op class on history.
Oh, American history?
It's actually the 15 decisive battles of the world, so kind of covering all over.
Oh, name 3.
Well, we're currently studying the Battle of Hastings, and we're going to be next dealing with Joan of Arc and then ending with the Battle of Waterloo.
Wow. That sounds like a great class. I'd like to attend that one. So how many states do you help our folks in?
So currently I have 6 states that I assist, ranging from New York, Kentucky, Florida, and then Oregon, New Mexico, Oklahoma.
Well, tell us, what's a day in the life of a HSLDA staff attorney like when you are helping people in all those states?
Well, I think each day is different, but the primary thing that we do is obviously help families understand what they're required to do, and then obviously assist them when there's issues of conflict, whether issues come from the local school officials or social services, conflicts that involve their homeschooling program.
In an average month, how many people do you think you talk to?
Well, it really depends. I would say on a good month, I may talk to somewhere around 50 people, families. Of course, my legal assistants will talk to many more than that. A lot of the times what we're doing is really helping them understand what they're required to do. And in a state like New York, there's a lot of complications. And so that does require often a lot of questions, particularly for new families.
And this time of year, I've heard that there are a lot of legislatures in session.
Yes, that's another one of my responsibilities is to help our families by monitoring legislation in the various states. And so each one of us as contact attorneys do monitor legislation, working with the state organizations to make sure that we continue to protect homeschooling, not only for this generation, but for the next.
Is there any legislation you're watching particularly this year?
There are a couple bills, some bills that deal with homeschools and the ability to participate in scholarships, like in Kentucky. Then there's also other legislation that we're looking at in Oklahoma, New York. We're always trying to reduce the requirements in that state, but unfortunately the legislature has never really seen fit to move forward on that bill.
So two of our principal goals over the years have been to improve homeschool laws where we can and to prevent retreats in growing regulation where those are introduced as well. So Kentucky has been an interesting state for you for a long time.
It has.
Give us a little background. You wrote an article recently about a current episode in the life of homeschoolers in a particular county, but give us a little background on the Kentucky law and why it presents problems from time to time.
Well, Kentucky is a pretty good state to homeschool in when you look at it compared with other states. But generally in Kentucky, you're seen as a private school. And so you have to comply with the same provisions that a private school would in that state. That provides some benefit because it's there are certain requirements for private schools that you just would certainly submit your documentation to your local school district. But there's an important case in Kentucky that underlines the fact that private schools are private and that they have the freedom to direct their child's education, to provide curriculum in a manner that they see fit. The state really only can dictate that you have to teach certain subjects. And so in the state of Kentucky, though, the one thing that often comes into play is the fact that local school officials believe that they have the right to inspect your homeschool program because in general terms, they have the right to inspect a private school. But when it comes to a private parent educating their own child at home, we believe in the privacy of your home. We have a Fourth Amendment right to that privacy. And so we work with local families and the state organization to make sure that these private schools, these homeschool programs are not being interfered with unnecessarily by local school officials.
Now, when you say inspect, you mean actually come out and check the rooms and the books and the fire escapes and that sort of thing?
Well, that's often what a local public school officials believe is that they have the right to come to your home, to come into your home and to actually inspect your records, to see what you're doing. And in many ways, they want to know the curriculum that you're using and they want you to provide the reports to them just at the request of them at any time.
Now, over the years, there have been some restrictions placed on those expectations by the public schools. Can you talk about those a bit?
Yeah, so many years ago, the state organizations, homeschool organizations developed what they call as a best practice document. And that was really a fundamental understanding that parents have that fundamental right to direct their children's education and that there would potentially be a constitutional issue with parents who are being forced by the public school to open up their homeschool program to inspection. And so we developed, the state organizations developed with HSLD assisting them in the background, a help of the best practices document. And that basically says that if you are in compliance with the law, you've submitted your notice of intent, then you're presumed to be operating a bona fide school and that no school official can demand access to you unless there's some specific evidence against your homeschool program.
So does that come up very often where so I think this recent episode was a county demanding kind of blanket inspection of homeschoolers?
Yeah, so it does come up quite frequently. I would say, half a dozen times a year, sometimes more frequently than that. But it is very common for local school officials for a variety of different reasons that they see a need to maybe crack down on homeschoolers. Maybe there's an increase in homeschooling in their county, or there's fewer students that they have are attending their schools. And so they have, from time to time, submitted these kind of mass record requests. And what happened in this county is what's happened in a number of counties over the years is that they send out a letter to every homeschooling family and they demand that you turn over your records and that they may come and inspect you.
So explain our position on why that's not okay, and what do we base it on?
Well, so I think the main reason that it's not okay is because, we believe that parents have that fundamental right to direct their children's education, and state law protects their right to teach their children at home. I think the main conflict that is there is that when school officials get involved in the homeschooling program, many times they're trying to make them appear or look like what the public school is teaching. A lot of times I get letters from the school officials who say, well, you just need to show us your curriculum, or you need to show us what you're doing, what you're teaching your child. And I think the beauty of the homeschooling movement is that you're able to develop that educational program that's best for your child, for your family. And it often doesn't look exactly like the public school. And so many of the times these school officials have the impression that if you're not doing what they're doing, then you're not educating your child.
Now, this case that just popped up, sometimes these things happen when there's a new official. Sometimes they happen, I imagine the post-COVID surge in people homeschooling might have encouraged this. Do you have any idea why it happened this time?
I like to speculate at times, but I don't know always the reason why some of these school officials do it. I suspect in this particular county that they're just seeing a drastic reduction in the number of students that are attending. And so that's hurting their bottom line. They're not able to see the revenue. And so when you have maybe a couple dozen homeschooling families and have 50 kids who are being homeschooled in that county, that to them represents a significant amount of revenue that they're losing. And so some of these school officials see these kids as their kids. In fact, as we believe, it's the family, the child who, the parents who have the responsibility of educating that child at home. So they're in the best position to determine what's in the best interest of their children.
Now, you mentioned that there are some circumstances where perhaps it's within their authority to ask to inspect records. What would that be?
Sure. Occasionally, there may be a situation where a parent begins to homeschool after the beginning of the school year. Maybe they make that decision now, in the middle of the school year. And so in that situation, then the law would, and the best practices would, allow the local school official to request certain information. It wouldn't allow them to approve their curriculum. It wouldn't allow them to approve whether they can homeschool, but it would allow them to, verify that they're providing an educational program and that they're keeping the records, the attendance records and the scholarship or report cards that they're required to under state law. So we do assist families from time to time in those situations. Other situations that develop are if you have maybe a family member, extended family member who makes a report that, this child is not being educated. If there is some evidence, then obviously the school officials may have, a just reason to request these records. And we assist families in those situations as well.
So there's a sort of a view out there sometimes amongst public school officials that homeschoolers have to really toe the mark and follow the law precisely. But sometimes they don't necessarily do that themselves. So why is it important that HSLDA does what we do?
Well, I think, each family has, the unique challenges and needs. And so one of the things that HSLDA does is to assist them in understanding not only what they can do, but also what they are required to do. And, sometimes we have families that they move into a new jurisdiction. They assume that they need to do what they've done before. And so they may not submit everything in the proper steps or may not follow exactly what's required under the procedures. And so, we're able to assist them in, correcting those situations. But in the vast majority of the situations that I ever come into contact with, you have one fundamental issue, and that is that on all these situations, the children are being educated. Most of the times, it's just a paperwork issue that we're dealing about.
So how much of your time do you think you spend actually educating the public officials as to what the law requires of them?
I would say that's a pretty significant part of what I do. In each state, it's different. So you have the different challenges. But a lot of the times in my communication to school officials, I'm actually explaining, okay, this is what the state law requires, or this is what the procedures and policies are in that state. And so I do spend a significant amount of kind of educating those school officials in much of what I do.
What's the most challenging part of your job?
Well, that's a loaded question. I guess I could go. I think probably
give a good answer.
Probably the most challenging is really trying to help a family where it's very clear to me that they're being unjustly persecuted, and yet you have a school official who's adamant that no, this is what must be done. They're looking at it through oftentimes the filter of this is what we do, this is what the public school does, and trying to put that kind of ruling stick over a homeschooling program. And so it is very rewarding when I'm able to resolve those situations and I'm able to, demonstrate to the school officials that no, what they're thinking, what they believe is supposed to happen in a situation is not actually what that family has the rights that they have.
So we did a case that you played a big part in a few years ago up in New York City on behalf of Tanya Acevedo. That is a pretty apt description of what you just said. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that case and what ended up happening there?
Well, actually, Mrs. Acevedo gave us a call over the emergency line, which I believe you took that call, and it was a social worker at the door.
Let's stop a second. What is an emergency call, and why did I take it?
Yeah, so HSLD, obviously we have normal working hours, but we also have an attorney on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so after 5 o'clock or on the weekends, we may occasionally get calls from our members who have an emergency situation. And typically, true emergency situations are where there's a school official or where there's a police officer at the door. And so in this situation, Mrs. Acevedo had a social worker at her door. It was, I believe, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And so she was able to contact our answering service who transferred the call to you, and you were able to, try to assist her with that social worker right there at the door.
So what in the world was that CPS investigator at her apartment door in New York City at 7 o'clock at night? Why was she there?
She was there investigating educational neglect. But the real reason she was there was primarily because the school had failed to withdraw the child from the public school. She had done everything that she had required to do. She had submitted her notice. She had withdrawn the student. She had sent this all certified mail, and yet they had failed to follow through with the procedures under New York law. They should have taken action within 10 days. Over 30 days had passed, and that's why CPS was at her door.
So the public schools in New York City failed to do what the law required of them, and at the end of 30 days, they called in a CPS investigator to go to her house. So how frightening is it when a CPS investigator shows up at your house over a homeschool paperwork issue that you've done everything right?
Yeah, well, I think for most parents, of course, that you've done everything right, but it's still very intimidating for a social worker who's there at your door, demanding entry into your home, demanding to interview your child, and many times saying that you can't be there. We're going to interview your child alone. And so Mrs. Acevedo was faced with that situation where she had someone at her door in basically the dark of night, demanding entry into her home and demanding access to her son, knowing full well that she had done everything that she was required. So on one hand, there's a great amount of frustration, but then also a little bit of fear because social services justly is an agent of the state. And in some situations, they need to take action. But, when it's dealing with a paperwork issue where a family has done everything that they're required to do, that's where I think it's extremely frustrating as an attorney, knowing that what should have been done hasn't been done.
So we get a call from this mom in New York City. I kind of diffused the situation that night, and then you took over. And how did what did you do next?
Well, I did a couple different things. I reached out to the caseworker, explained to them that the mom had done everything that she was required to do. I also contacted the main state or the main homeschool organization in New York City, which is the Central Office of Homeschooling, and I was able to get them to process the paperwork what they should have done 20 days ago, I was able to get them to process that paperwork and to actually withdraw that child so that the social worker could then confirm that she had done everything that she'd been required to do. And then we assisted Mrs. Acevedo throughout that process. Normally, the social service investigation, depending on your state, can take anywhere from 45 to 60 days. And so we assisted her, and it was gratifying to see that case was closed, as it should have been, and it was unfounded, unsubstantiated.
Now, was Tanya Acevedo the only homeschooler in New York City that year that you helped in similar circumstances?
No, she was not the only family. We've had a number of families who faced a very similar situation. Many times we get contacted when that family is getting these calls from the school. And so we're able to kind of step in and get involved. Since Tanya Acevedo's case, we've had others, similar cases. But because of the work that we did in the Acevedo situation, it has dramatically changed. And I could say that there are very, very few situations where we've had any social worker contact simply for that issue.
So one of the ways I like to look at what we do at HSLDA is that, we're here to help that one person, Tanya Acevedo, when she has a problem like this. We're here to help those Kentucky families when the school district overreaches. We're going to help that family to the best of our ability with that family's interests in mind. But with Tanya Acevedo, so we diffused the situation, we got the investigation, closed, we assisted her throughout that. But then, because it was a pervasive problem in New York City, what else did we do?
Well, we were able to, because of the case that we took, we were able to actually...
What case did we take?
Well, we took the Acevedo case.
We didn't take the case. We invented the case. We sued New York City homeschool office because of their persistent failure to follow the law.
So the case that we litigated in the Acevedo case did produce a initial benefit, obviously, for Mrs. Acevedo, but it also had an impact on other homeschooling families. And I would say it still has an impact on homeschooling families in New York. So because of the victory that we had in that case, the New York City Department of Education was required to report to us for 2 years on how they were processing their paperwork. And the purpose was both to reinforce to them that they were required to follow the paperwork in a timely manner, but it also allowed us to verify that they were doing that. And I would say that they've done a fair job of doing that. There's still been issues, like I said, it's not been perfect, but it has allowed us to, I think, significantly reduce the negative situations that many families would have likely have experienced if we hadn't have taken that case.
And so when you get a call from a family in Kentucky, you're going to help that one family, but like in this case that you just wrote about, you were able to help lots and lots of families.
Right. Oftentimes we'll get contacted by 1 or 2 or 3 families who get these mass letters in Kentucky. But because we're able to step out and reinforce what the policy is, we're able to protect really all the families in that county. And so it does have, really a significant impact. Not only does your membership at HSLDA help protect your family, but in many of these situations, it also helps protect other families some of whom don't know anything about HSLDA.
Yeah, so other families in different school districts in Kentucky may not get this letter, but the dozens or hundreds of families that did are being helped by people out in California and people in Oregon. And we never know, right? You never know when you walk in on a Tuesday morning just what the day is going to hold. And just like when Tanya Acevedo called the emergency hotline, we didn't really know just how far it was going to go. But by helping her, we saw an opportunity to sue the city and make them fix their procedures. And that helps, not just the homeschool families of the day, but down the road too. But as you pointed out, you still have to be vigilant because the bureaucracy has a tendency to kind of revert to the norm, I think.
Right. No, it does. And it does also provide us other opportunities. Not only do we take, litigation, do we bring forth litigation There's other situations that come up that because of these scenarios that we're protecting individual families, protecting individual, counties where there are groups of families getting these wrong and I would say unlawful letters, we're able to then have a broader impact in protecting homeschooling freedom. And it's provided an opportunity. I mean, there have been situations where we've testified along with the state homeschool organization in Kentucky to try to address even some of these larger issues.
Well, thanks, TJ. Any final thoughts on what you do here or how you protect freedom? What do you see for the future?
Well, I'm not a prophet, but certainly grateful to the work that HSLDA does. I mean, it had a personal impact on my own family. It took many years for my parents to be able to begin homeschooling in our state that we lived in northern Vermont. My parents didn't know anything about HSLDA, but it was through that experience that kind of helped kind of maybe form the foundation of an interest in this area. And as an attorney, I knew that I was interested in trying to protect and defend families as well.
Well, thanks, TJ. My guest today is TJ Schmidt, staff attorney, longtime staff attorney, protecting homeschool freedom in several states, most recently in Kentucky. And I just want to thank you all for listening and invite you to visit our website at hslda.org. If you're not a member, you can join there to help families all over the country. You can also donate to our Homeschool Freedom Fund. We also have a compassion mission where we help homeschooling families who need a little extra financial help, and you can make donations there as well. So once again, I'm Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, thanking you for joining us today.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's legal support team. We know homeschooling isn't always easy. That's why we're committed to giving you peace of mind, so you can focus on giving your kids the best possible education. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized legal advice from our team of attorneys to help you comply with your state's homeschool law. And will represent you if your right to homeschool is ever challenged, even in court. Every day, we help our members respond to overreaching officials, and we stand ready to defend your homeschool against unlawful attacks. To hear more about how you can enjoy a worry-free homeschool experience, visit hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.